Hi everyone, how's it going? Do you want to rock system design interviews which involves designing, large-scale distributed systems? As it has become, the standard part of the software engineering interviews, be it for the beginner, pro or mid or senior role at every big or small company. I myself struggled with system design interviews and I felt I was all over the place, and I could not come up, with a single flow design within that, 45 minutes. One of the major challenges that most of us face is how do we effectively manage our time so we can come up, with the most effective solution in that 45 minutes. So in this video, I will share with you what I come up with as my strategy or technique, to handle, this system design interview slot, which is fill up, the stomach when hungry, done technique, where F is the feature freeze and U is the use cases and S is the store and H is the high level system design, and then lastly D is for the detailed design. So welcome back to the TechSki Master. So let's see how much time I usually spend in each of these slots, using fill up stomach when hungry, done technique, all the times estimate, times and may vary in certain situations. However, I found this breakdown very effective and useful, so F is for feature freeze, around 5 minutes approximately. So use the first 5 minutes to ask clarifying questions and try to freeze 2 to 3 features or more, depending on the context, features that you are trying to design. For example, if you are designing an online clothes store, you can think about let's say buy and check out clothes, or search clothes under different categories, and tags such as colors, material and size, and user profile. Usually this will be common for most of the applications. Do a first pass with these features and suggest more also enhancements such as customization, delivery tracking, 3D visualization using the AR, etc. So be mindful that these things might need more time to drill into, so the interviewer may just ask to pick one of the enhancements that may sound more interesting. Also, if you think something can be relevant to your past experience or something you are really very confident about, now is the time to to include it. Now let's move on to U, which is use cases, 5 to 6 minutes approximately for each feature you looked onto the previous step. Come up with some use cases, make sure to include negative use cases as well and highlight what your system won't be, addressing clearly. You can discuss, the trade-offs, preferences about picking specific use cases. Take some time to also do the calculation about traffic pattern, calls per second, expected SLA, etc. So now let's move on to S, which stands for store. This will be approximately 3 minutes approximately, depending on use cases and scenario. Decide what you'll be storing. For clothes use cases, you will need to store the inventory, the item ID, the price, the quantity, state of items in user wish list, user information, etc. Also check the amount of data that you end up storing depending on target audience and come up with estimates for your data store. Leave the door open for extensions and growth in future. So now let's move on to H, which is the high level system design, which is approximately 7 minutes. This is the soul of the problem. Come up with different components, services, and define their high level interaction with each other as per the use cases and the feature that you defined before. So also include how end user will interact with the system. It will be API endpoints, web UI, mobile app, etc. Figure out what database interaction will not look like. You use any queuing mechanism to queue any request. You can start with small system and scale it later. It is also the right time to touch about how to deliver the responses effectively and quickly. Do you need caches? Will it be browser cache, mem cache D, etc. with their trade-offs. Go deep into it with the detailed design later on. So this discussion will show your depth of understanding, about different aspects that you are aware of and are considering in your design. Please not, it's not about just using, the terms. It's not sufficient. You should also have proper understanding of, everything. So let's move on to the last technique, which is D stands for detailed design, and the done, which is 20 minutes of product. This is where I would spend my most of the time, and I would usually divide this section further is, like 8 minutes, like for APIs and interaction. Start with defining APIs for the different use cases. You can use microservice architecture, define specific microservices for certain, features. Think about how you can improve the SLAs and response times. Some interviews can ask you to define some classes and relations and maybe write a minor function for certain use cases. Who knows? So be open to it, and then I spend my 5 minutes, on the database design, like SQL, NoSQL, data store, etc. The interviewer may ask you to write like some few SQL queries here, So be prepared to justify your choices with solid reasoning. Kept theory often comes very handy. I like it in making the decision about which database to choose for which use cases, and then I'll spend my 7 minutes like on scalability. Most interviewers will be very interested in knowing how scalable your solution is. So this is where you will take different measures to scale and optimize your response. How are you going, to do your load balancing to make sure that your single server is not overloaded with tons of requests while other servers are just, sitting there idle. So how are you going to do the distribution of the requests as well, like data, like data sharding, with going to geolocation based, key based, hash based, etc. What kind of caching solution can you use? One of the important questions often comes up is, what are you going to do when your data is growing extremely very large? So how are you going to truncate, archive the data that might not be needed frequently, etc. So you can, also touch base around caching solutions and how to flash caches and ensure consistency or the availability of the cache, etc. So be prepared for a lot of cross questioning, mostly in this section, as the interviewers would like to test your knowledge, and not just on the concept, but maybe also be interested in knowing how familiar are you with existing solutions in the market. This discussion are also done to check your communication skills, so know that, and also your convincing power, etc., etc. So this is pretty much sums up how I would spend my 40 minutes out of the interview and leaving the 5 minutes for the introduction questions, using my fill up the stomach when hungry technique. So conclusion, I want you to listen carefully and don't rush, to design in your mind, mostly while the interviewer is still explaining the questions. We start like thinking ahead and trying to link it with something that you might have done in your past, either at your job or a school project, or read while preparing for interview. Don't panic. If you are not aware of the domain, show what skills and knowledge you have instead of figuring out what interviewer is looking out in you. Use black box technique for tribal processes in context. Always bring up trade-offs when telling your choices. Just telling your choice to the interviewer is not always very sufficient. So before the interview question you further, it's a good practice to bring up the trade-offs and any other context that made you select A over B. This shows the depth of understanding, and it's not just like a random choice. So don't forget to like, to subscribe, and to ring the notification bell. As always, keep on skiing in the tech world.